Hi, my name's Joseph. Welcome to the Eclectic Philatelist. This is episode 15. This is the third video that I've done on Philatelic Books. Today, rather interesting, we're going to take a look at the new, the old, and the just plain weird. The first book we're going to take a look at is a new book, relatively new. It was published in 2021, and the title is Paper Trails, the U.S. Post and the Making of the American West by Cameron Blevins. Now, Cameron Blevins is a leader in the field of history, and he's an associate professor in the history department at the University of Colorado in Denver. And this, I think, is a fantastic book if, like many collectors, you're into the history of the United States postal system. And this book covers 19th century postal history, how it expanded throughout the United States, everything from public posts to private posts, how postmasters were hired and fired, and how post offices seemed to crop up, both public and private, and how they were also closed down. There's an interesting quote from the book at the first flap of the book here, and it says, "There were 5 times as many post offices in the United States in 1899 than there are McDonald's restaurants today." Great book. There's a lot of maps in here, a lot of charts that talk about the statistics of how much mail was used, talks about the routes that mail was used throughout the United States, talks about how the system had some difficulties and how it was subject to many methods of reform that were tried. Even gets into the expenditures and the costs of running post offices throughout this time period in the United States. Everything down to costs of mailing a parcel, for example, with how much the wrapping paper cost and how much the string cost and things like this. Also gets into a lot of controversy about special administrative topics with the post office throughout the West, and of course the differences between public and private posts, but also the difficulties with things like geography, transportation at various times. And sometimes people think of the early history of the United States postal system and they talk about the Pony Express. But as this book points out, the Pony Express was a short-lived and actually a very small part of the U.S. postal system in the United States during this time period. So Paper Trails, the United States Post and the Making of the American West. It's a well-written book. Again, the author is a professor of history. So if you're really into the history and collect United States stamps, or if you just want to learn more about how the post office evolved in that time period in the United States, this book, highly recommended. I'd put it high on your list if you're interested in these topics. Recently in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I attended a stamp show, and at the entrance to the show, they had a table where members of the local stamp clubs had books that they were giving away free. And I always prowl through all the books, and whenever I come across a table like that, either books for purchase or especially books that are being given away for free. I do like a lot of old books, especially those on philatelic topics. And I happened to come across this little book here, and I love it. It's called Let's Start a Stamp Collection by John S. Turner. And this is an older book. My copy happens to be in pretty good shape. It was published in 1940. So for an older book, this one is, I think, really just chock full of information on starting a stamp collection. It was originally, as the introduction to the book talks about, trying to get new collectors or young collectors involved in stamp collecting. And I'll put up a couple of pages from the table of contents, and you can see that first it just talks about very simple things like what is a stamp and how to collect stamps. Gets into how to build a collection and how to choose what goes in your collection. Then it gets into some technical topics, and even for a book from the 1940s, the descriptions of these technical topics is excellent. And there's a lot of examples little black and white drawings that illustrate the subject throughout the book. For example, he talks about in Chapter 4 paper, the different types of paper that was used for stamps. Chapter 5 talks about printing and printing methods. Then he gets into colors and perforations and overprints, and then basic stamp designs and how stamps are designed and how they come to be put into production. He also gets into cancellations and counterfeits, how to specialize in a collecting area, which was an excellent chapter in here. It gives a lot of ideas. What stamps are worth, of course, since this was a 1940 book, the chapter's a little bit outdated, but it's still pretty interesting to see how people looked at the value of stamps back in that time period. Then it gets into just some details of United States stamps for the new collector, and has some tables in the back of the book that help you identify different types of stamps and different symbols on stamps internationally as well as within the United States. It's a fascinating read. It's a pretty good reference for 1940 for anyone that likes to collect older philatelic books or is just a book collector of philatelic books from any time period. This is a nice little edition. And again, I came across this one free, which was even better. I'm sure you can find it on many used bookshops yet available. One of the other things I liked in here is a lot of maps. I put one photo up of one of the maps from the first part of the book, and then at the end of the book, there's another 2-page map that's drawn in here. So let's start a stamp collection by John S. Turner from 1940. Another one, if you can find it in used bookstores, highly recommended, fun read, a lot of information in a small book. And it's great to see the perspective from a collector back in 1940. The last book I'm going to talk about today is a bit on the weird side. I don't have a hard copy or a paperback of this. I don't know if any exist in the used markets. I've looked at some used bookstores to try and find one. But the copy I have is an ebook. It's a Kindle book. Found it on Amazon Kindle book list. I found it by accident. I was searching for philatelic books, and I came across one with a very strange title, and I just had to purchase it to just see what this was all about. So this is the book called Occult Philately, Stamps, Literature, Science in Modern Magic by Ditin Lubina. Now, Ditin Lubina is an older author, and he was from the Soviet Union, or grew up under the Soviet Union, and I'm not sure exactly his age, and there wasn't any information in here about exactly when this book was written, but it is definitely quite a different read. It's kind of fascinating. The table of contents is pretty sparse. It looks like this was a book that was very cheaply copied from a hardcover to a ebook format. So sometimes some of the formatting is a little bit wonky. It can kind of throw you off a little bit here. I'll show a page from the table of contents, and he talks a lot about ethnophilately and how anthropology and magic and philately are tied together. I'm not sure how magic falls into this, but it's certainly interesting and a little bit on the different side. He starts the book by getting into what he calls ethnophilatelic research and analysis, which is kind of a mouthful, but it seems a bit disjointed in his writing. He's trying to talk about stamps around the world and how stamps around the world had ties to ritual and to cultural practices from primitive cultures. And then he gets into educational and documentary potential of the material. He kind of takes us through stamps from around the world and how they might fit into his mindset of this book. And then it starts to get a little bit off the wall, I think. He starts getting into stamps as magical material and theories of communication channels and occult philately he calls a combination of science and magic. And he does get into a lot of topics on this about how to actually use stamps, not just for things like as a object of meditation, but in magical procedures or magical rituals. Also in the back of the book, he has an annex of astrological signatures of the very historical sciences, as he calls them, and a quite long list of terms that apply to this subject and some references as to some other quite old literature. What I found interesting was in the past the table of contents in this book, one of the first pages includes this warning. I'll show up on the screen, and it says, "Techniques described in this book are potentially dangerous. They are intended," misspelled, "for skilled adepts of Hermeticism, magic, and occultism. Everyone tries them at their own risk, and neither the author nor the publisher may be held responsible for any damage or harm caused by their thoughtless use." That's quite an introduction. I've never seen anything like that in a philatelic book. Now, part of what he talks about in here, I have a little bit of interest in, besides my stamp collecting and my work in making these YouTube channels and things. I do teach meditation on the side, and in meditation there is something called an object of meditation. It's simply what you focus on as you go into a meditative state. And it could be something as simple as a candle flame is often used if you're using some kind of visual image. It could be a sound. In some cultures in the East, they might use a sound like Om, or it could be anything else. There are Western techniques of meditation that you can use whatever you create. It's just something to give your mind something to focus on and hold your attention. Well, in this book, he's suggesting that you can use postage stamps from around the world for this purpose. And he describes how to use a postage stamp as an object of meditation, to observe the stamp as you go into a meditative state and become absorbed by the images on the stamp. And okay, I can see that. It helps your concentration and focus during meditation. But then he goes kind of off the wall into things like contacting spirits and all of this kind of stuff. So Occult Philately, a very strange book, but if you're interested in collecting philatelic books, like I said, so far I've only found this available as an ebook. The one I have is in the Kindle format. I'm sure there may be other ones out there. If you ever come across a copy of a hard copy of this book somewhere at a used bookstore or something, please let me know. I'd be interested in finding that out. But let me know in the comments kind of what you think about this strange philatelic book. Is this something you would read? Would you add it to your collection? I can almost see it lending itself to the subject of a fictional novel. Maybe that's another project I need to work on. The last book in our series, Occult Philately. So this was episode 15 of the Eclectic Philatelist, the third in a series of videos on philatelic books and collecting philatelic books. Again, we looked at a new book about postal history and post offices of the United States in the early days of the 19th century. Also took a look at an older book from 1940, kind of a beginner's book to stamp collecting. I like that book a lot. That's a great one. And then the third and last one, the rather unusual book. I never thought a book on philately would have a title of Occult Philately, but there you go. So again, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel. And as always, happy collecting.